Hi everyone! Today we're going to be reading our breaking news. The breaking news today is Remembering George Floyd. People across the U.S. are remembering George Floyd. George Floyd died on May 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He died after a police officer hurt him. People are remembering George at services. People are giving speeches about George at the services. The first service was June 4th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Another service will be June 6th in Rayford, North Carolina. George was born near Rayford. A funeral will be in June 9th in Houston, Texas. George grew up in Houston. So let's review a couple of these, what we just read. People in the US, where you and I live, are remembering George Floyd. And he died on May 25th, so last month, in a city called Minneapolis, in a state in Minnesota. A police officer had hurt him, and so there are services like a funeral, a memorial, where people can remember George. And they are giving speeches, so they're talking about him and how they remember him. So there were several services. There was one on June 4th in Minneapolis. There was another on June 6th in Rayford, and that's where George was born. And there was another one on June 9th in Houston, Texas, where he grew up. So let's answer some questions. The first question says, what are people giving at the services? Tests, presents, or speeches? So if we go back, what are they giving at the services? If we look here, people are giving speeches about George at the services. So they are giving speeches. So we can say speeches.
Speeches.
Number 2, who are people remembering at services? Is it Jennifer Hudson, Shaquille O'Neal, or George Floyd? So let's look at our title. This is George Floyd. Remembering George Floyd. So who are people remembering at services? People are remembering George Floyd.
George Floyd.
And the last, number 3, where was the first service? Atlanta, Georgia, Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Las Vegas, Nevada? So let's click back and look here. The first service, so the number 1 service, was June 4th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So we see here, where was the first service? It was in Minneapolis,
Minneapolis,
Minnesota.
Minnesota.